Anti-tax crusader Grover Norquist not backing down on his opposition to new revenues, higher tax rates, even as the fiscal cliff clock ticks down. Here's what he said earlier on Squawk Box. Listen up.
Raising taxes is always bad for the economy. That doesn't change. Raising taxes is what politicians do instead of reforming government. I mean, the reason we haven't reformed the entitlements, the reason we haven't reined in spending is that politicians go, oh, we'll just raise taxes and backfill.
Congressman Yoder is a Republican from Kansas, sits on the House Appropriations Committee, a plum assignment, especially for a freshman. He's one of a handful of Republicans who did not sign the Norquist Taxpayer Protection Pledge. Congressman Yoder, welcome. Why didn't you sign the pledge, and are you happy you didn't?
Well, thanks for having me on, and I don't sign pledges. I don't believe our job is to make a pledge to a third-party group in Washington, D.C. My pledge is to the Constitution. My pledge is to the voters of the 3rd District. And so as this debate wages on how we get off the fiscal cliff, I'm not one who's has taken some pledge to a third-party group here. My focus is on how do we get through this situation, how do we find the best result for the American people, and there's a lot of opinions out there, and so we've got to listen to all voices to come to a conclusion. That requires that we don't shut any idea out before we come to a solution.
There has been, I suppose, a tremendous and understandably a tremendous amount of attention on raising the top marginal rates for the top 2% of taxpayers. But one of the articles I read just recently indicated that raising those rates would address something like 4% of our total debt issue. The remainder has to be addressed in other ways, specifically by going after spending. What spending cuts are you specifically willing to sign on to today, and most particularly with respect to Medicare?
Well, I think we need spending reductions at every level of the federal government. It's not, as has been said many times, it's not that Washington spends too little, it's that it taxes too much. And so we're trying to find ways to reduce spending in all areas. That means domestic spending, that means defense, that means waste in the Pentagon, and yes, that means our entitlement programs. We have to reform the federal government, and what a great opportunity with the new Congress coming in, with the country focused on these issues, for us to come together and actually take a top-to-bottom review, reprioritize spending at every level, and reduce the federal expenditures. We have to cut spending in this town. We are not going to tax our way to prosperity, and so myself and other members, and I hopefully think members in both parties, are ready for serious budget reform and serious spending reductions. And frankly, we've all been disappointed that we haven't seen the leadership out of the White House in that same direction, and that's the biggest sticking point to why we can't get to a solution regarding the fiscal cliff at this point.
How specifically would you address the spending in Medicare? It seems to me that Americans are very accustomed to seeing their health care benefits cut. Just ask anyone who works for a major corporation over the past 20 years, and you would see that the portion of your medical care that you pay for has risen as the portion of the medical care that your companies pay for it has declined. Why are we so afraid of that, and what specifically would you urge us to consider with respect to Medicare savings?
Well, if we don't make revisions to Medicare going forward into the future, Medicare itself will go bankrupt, and it will swallow the national budget, driving us into a great deficit, sending us towards Greece and a European decline. And so we all know, and I think members of both parties recognize, that a resolution to the Medicare liabilities has to be part of
Give me one thing, give me one idea that you would be ready to sign on to today that would significantly reduce Medicare spending.
Well, we've already passed such a solution in the House. Last year, we passed legislation that would reform Medicare. It was the budget that Paul Ryan, chairman of the Budget Committee, put forward. We passed it with a majority vote in the House, sent it to the Senate. The Senate hasn't passed the budget, as we know, in over 1,000 days, and so we weren't able to get them engaged on that topic. But that proposal was able to bend the cost curve of Medicare, put us towards balancing the budget, and preserve Medicare exactly the way it is for current retirees. And I think that's the balance you have to strike. That legislation struck a balance at 55 and above, keeping Medicare exactly the way it is, and then making changes for those in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And most folks that I talk to in those groups understand that we've got to reform Medicare in order to save it and to balance the federal budget.
Congressman Yoder, good luck to you, and we'll hopefully see you on the other side of a deal.